Hello and welcome again to AP World History. My name is Jason Epan. This is class number 7. Class number 7. Last class we finished our chapter on Persia and we went through China's classical age as we discussed Confucianism and Taoism and legalism. I also want to make it clear that a lot of famous poets came from this age. This really was China's classical age when it came to their own cultural development. The famous book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, also came out during this era, the classical age. We also finished the Qin Dynasty, Qin Dynasty, and thus we are at the moment now when there's a new dynasty taking hold of China. And that dynasty is the Han Dynasty. China likes to call themselves sometimes the Han people or the Han race, and this is the Han Dynasty. Now, by 206 of the Common Era, a guy by the name of Liu Bang, L-I-U Bang, B-A-N-G, restored order, and he is considered to be the first Han Emperor. Liu Bang wasn't particularly charismatic and he wasn't particularly talented. He just had the right people by him, and these people, along with Liu's sort of, you would say, steady leadership, provided for the reunification of China under the Han. Now, the Han really seek to find some type of middle ground between the ultra centralization and the ultra stiff rigidness of the Qin dynasty and the looseness and the too decentralized Zhou dynasty, Z-H-O-U, Zhou dynasty. And that was one of their main goals. Probably the Han Empire peaked with a ruler by the name of Han Wudi, W-U-D-I, Han Wudi, who ruled from 141 to 87 BCE. He is known as the martial emperor, and he very much advocated a certain amount of centralization and also expansion. And that expansion is going to cause problems for the Han dynasty in the future, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But first of all, I want you to understand what the Han Dynasty did. It established a land register by dividing the empire into multiple administrative units. They also completed, I'm not saying it was the world's first census, but in 2 CE they completed a real elaborate census which placed the Chinese population, at least what they calculate, the areas that they used, as being 60 million people. The Han are responsible for building an enormous bureaucracy to rule the empire. They built lots of roads and canals. They levied plenty of taxes on agriculture, trade, and craft to make sure that the government's coffers were always well adorned. A couple of specific aspects of the Han. First of all, like the Shang in the past, the Han ruled by giving themselves, meaning the empire and certain members of the aristocracy, absolute monopolies over iron and salt. Iron and salt, and those are two very different, very precious commodities within a society. And when you have, that's how they establish control very much, is that they're responsible for, and they kept track of who is getting what amount of those two things. Another very important aspect of the Han that becomes very influential in later Chinese dynasties like the Tang and the Ming is that they created the Confucian educational system. The Confucian educational system, which was set in place so that those individuals who received a very high score on the annual civil service exam, those people are the ones who are going to make their way up to the Chinese bureaucracy. So you may say, why is the bureaucracy so large? It's so large as to encourage people to be educated in the Zhou Han classics, or whatever it was that the Han wanted its citizens, or I should say its top citizens, to know and to espouse. Okay? The civil service exam, the Confucian system, it does benefit even though everyone has the opportunity to become a member of the Junshi, the Junzi, superior individuals, and thus part of the government, really, I would say that the odds were stacked in the favor of the rich and the wealthy. Why? Because the rich and the wealthy could afford to purchase a great deal of assistance for their children, whereas the poor, the kids had to learn for themselves. They had to fend for themselves. They had to be more self-sufficient. sufficient, okay? So the idea of, I know in Korean it's called Hagwon, the idea of a private academy really comes from this Confucian system where children of families that can afford to receive assistance or to pay for assistance send their children to these academies so that they can learn all that is required to be learned and do better on the civil service exam, basically outcompete those who don't go to private academies. Another aspect of the Han Dynasty is that they were very interested in imperial expansion. As I mentioned before, it was very common for Chinese emperors to make sure that all of the agricultural surpluses that the majority of people, the peasantry, are providing go to the army, so that the army can go outside of the Middle Kingdom, outside China, and perhaps expand its territories. They successfully did so in Korea. A great deal of territory that Korea formerly owned in today what is called Manchuria, I think it's still called Manchuria. A great deal of that territory Korea used to own, China sort of took that from them, and there was a whole historical saga, which some of you may be familiar with, and how they got that. Another country which China often battled with is Vietnam. And Vietnam was quite good at keeping a certain amount of independence from Han China and from the future Chinese dynasties. They fought vigorously hard to maintain this independence, and this is a topic I'm going to get back to later on. I believe it's chapter 15 when I start discussing the variety of other areas within Asia. What you need to know is that the Han really did, especially during the early parts of its dynasty, enjoy uncontested hegemony or dominance over East and Central Asia. They were very successful at subduing the Xiongnu territory, which are sort of Xiongnu territory that's found in, you would say, closer to Western China and people like that. In fact, these are the people who I believe today are the Chinese Muslims, the Uyghurs. Again, my pronunciation, I apologize. Uyghur. These are the people sort of in, you would say, Western China who have an Islamic background, who are Islamic, but still live in the country of China. And often in the news we hear about certain, fights that break out between these Xiongnu people and the Chinese government. Okay, anyways. So that gives you an idea of sort of the political situation in the Han Dynasty. Let's talk about the economic prosperity, all right, during this time. There is no doubt whatsoever that during the early Han Dynasty and as the Silk Roads begin to kick in, which we'll be talking about later in chapter 12, okay, that the Han Dynasty is enjoying really an immense amount of prosperity. The majority of people are cultivators, but there's all different types of new farming tools and harvesting tools due to the fact that iron is now spread out throughout China. Again, it's controlled by the very top, but obviously they're allowing the peasants and the farmers to have access to it so that they provide for better harvests, etc., etc. Something else that the Han Dynasty is known for is when sericulture or silk weaving, silk products are becoming an enormous economy and source of revenue for China, especially because people from all over the world would like to have some of these products. Something else that the Han were responsible for, that obviously is, I guess you would say, key to life for everyone today, is that the Han are responsible for replacing bamboo, replacing silk as writing material, and bringing in paper. That's right, the Chinese, you could say, invented paper. All right, no more bamboo, no more silk. Now we're writing on, you would say, I get the bark of wood. Isn't paper wood? I think so. I think it is. Anyways, and so as we know, it's very prosperous during this time. Unfortunately, for the Han, times are always not going to be good. And why is that? Well, what happens is that because the Han are they're so obsessed with the idea of expansion that a great deal of their treasury is spent in trying to you would say, obtain more land for itself. Well, this is a problem because what happens is that the Chinese government is soon going to run out of money. And when they run out of money, what do they need to do? They need to raise taxes. And they do. They start raising taxes on some of China's some of their most wealthy families. All right, and not only are they raising taxes, but sometimes the government is just outright taking land from these people as well to help, provide food and to provide a source of revenue for the emperor's continual usage, be it for expansion or other means. Okay? Well, the wealthy and the aristocracy, they're not going to take this well. They're not taking this well. I mean, you know, you imagine these people have a big head and a big ego as it is, and then there's somebody a little bit higher than them who's taking, you know, who's now greatly increased the amount of taxes that you have to pay to the emperor, as well as sometimes taking your land. So what are the wealthy going to do? Well, they're going to do the same thing the emperor does. Everyone always attacks someone who is lower than them, and that's what the wealthy do. The wealthy start taking away land from the smaller peasants. They start making certain economic arrangements that makes the peasants' life a great deal harder. And what this is going to cause is a great deal of acrimony between the majority of peasants and cultivators and their sort of wealthy, noble masters, you could say, in China. All right? And this is going to cause a big, big problem. Because what happens is that when you have this greater amount of acrimony, the amount of investment that's going into new businesses is also lowering. So it's a sort of domino effect in which the Han Dynasty is going to slowly go down, down, down. So we have problems of land distribution, okay? Problems of land distribution. For a brief period of time, there was this socialist emperor, a guy by the name of Wang Mang, W-A-N-G, Mang, M-A-N-G. He was known as a socialist emperor, and he really tried to rectify this land distribution problem. Unfortunately, he only lasts for 14 years, in between 9 and 23 of the Common Era, and then he's kicked out, and the problems are going to continue. The people who were being preyed upon the most and bullied upon the most, the majority, you would say the peasants, they begin to form their own type of political groups. And their entire sort of collective is known as the Yellow Turbans. The Yellow Turbans, because I think in Chinese, yellow stands for earth, not, you know, sometimes in the West we think of yellow as the sun, but here yellow stood for the earth. Or maybe even like the Loess that found its way into the Yellow River, right? So what we have now are the Yellow Turbans, and they're responsible for causing a great deal of uprisings, a great deal of protests and revolts against the wealthy and against the empire for the inequity of land distribution. All right? Obviously, then, what is this going to do? It's going to create, you know, it just creates factional warfare. When you have a variety of groups created, and they're created to, you know, probably benefit themselves. So problems of these factions and land distribution lead ultimately to a certain type of rebellion. All right? And eventually what happens, because the empire loses control, or I should say the emperor loses control over his reign, his army, because remember, the Han Dynasty always maintained a very, very high amount of people in their army, generals began to usurp the authority of the emperor, and they really started taking over for the emperor. Okay? And by 220 of the Common Era, these generals abolished the Han. Bye-bye, bye-bye Han. So Han lasts again from 206 BCE to 220 of the Common Era. And once they dissolve the Han Empire, they divide China into 3 major kingdoms. And basically, for the next 350 years, what you have is, first you have these 3 kingdoms, and then you're going to have a bunch of nomadic groups coming in and sort of spoiling and further fractionalizing these 3 kingdoms. And it's basically a period, you would say, from 220 CE up until about 600. I should say, I think it's 589 CE, which is the advent of the Sui dynasty. China is disunified, fractionalized. Its economy has been reduced. And also the amount of people within China have also gone down. These are issues we're going to talk about in Chapter 12, because whereas the Silk Road brought great things, it also brought some not so great things, meaning very bad, yucky things. I mean, that is one of the reasons as well why Chinese society contracts. And remember that word contract, because that's what we're going to find after when we talk about the Roman Empire in Chapter 11 and at the end of the Han Dynasty. We find both of these societies contracting due to certain consequences of their own behavior and from the Silk Road itself. All right, I believe this brings us to the end of Chapter 8, and that means we are on Chapter 9. And Chapter 9 is all about South Asia, India, basically how classical India goes. What we're going to be doing first is we're going to talk about sort of the political empires, etc., and the people who ruled over South Asia from about 500 BCE till about CE, okay? And basically, what we have is this. People tend to divide into 2 major sections, the Mauryan dynasty and the Gupta dynasty, but there are lots of people who rule in between. For example, I mentioned in the chapter 7 a little bit about Alexander the Great, right? And I didn't talk too much about him because I'm going to talk about him in chapter 11. But Alexander the Great, during his reign over, a great deal of the world, he made it as far as the Indus River, which is located obviously in South Asia in India. But he really didn't stay very long, and when he left, and this would have been sort of around the 330s, 320s BCE, this led a power vacuum in South Asia. And a group of people called the Magadha, M-A-G-A-D-H-A, they fill this vacuum for, a few years, until somewhere around the 320s BCE, a man by the name of Chandragupta Maurya, let me spell that for you, C-H-A-N-D-R-A-G-U-P-T-A, Maurya, M-A-U-R-Y-A. This individual begins a conquest of all of South Asia somewhere around the 320s BCE, right? And so thus, he is the individual responsible for founding the Mauryan Dynasty, M-A-U-R-Y-A-N Dynasty. And eventually, the Mauryan Dynasty is going to go from the Ganges River, which is located a little bit on the other side of the country in further east and a little bit south, okay, to Bactria. All right, Bactria is sort of an area today that's located a bit in Pakistan, even Afghanistan. It's sort of in the northwestern part, obviously, of India into Pakistan and Afghanistan. So obviously what we have here is a very big expanse of land, which the Mauryan Dynasty rules over. Very, very, you could say, reasonably large amount. Okay? One of the later rulers of the Mauryan Dynasty, a guy by the name of Kautala, K-A-U-T-A-L-A, provided an advice manual. He wasn't, I shouldn't say a ruler, he was one of the chief advisors and someone very high up in terms of power. Provided the advice manual on how the Mauryan Dynasty should rule over its people, okay? Meaning the administrative methods. This is called the Arthashastra, A-R-T-H-A-S-H-A-S-T-R-A. Arthashastra, okay? And this again details the administrative methods created by Kautala for the Mauryan Dynasty, K-A-U-T-A-L-A. When it comes to the most famous ruler of the Mauryan Dynasty, most people universally agree that we have to stop at Ashoka. Ashoka. A-S-H-O-K-A, Ashoka, who ruled from 268 to 232 BCE, typically considered to be the peak of the empire, okay? He did many, many things. He conquered a certain kingdom by the name of Kalinga, K-A-L-I-N-G-A, around 260 BCE. He had a very tightly ordered bureaucracy. And when you have something which is tightly ordered, you don't have too many, you would say, heads on a dragon. Everybody is coming from the same brain. And so everything runs a lot more smoothly. Okay? He established and built a capital at Pataliputra, P-L-P-A-T-A-L-I-P-U-T-R-A, Pataliputra. And what else is he known for? Ashoka, yes. One of the most famous things Ashoka is known for is that he wrote his policies and his laws upon rocks and pillars, okay? And what a lot of this stuff here was just, ways that society should conduct themselves. Basically, a set of teachings based on nonviolence, tolerance, and generosity. And these teachings later become known as the Dharma. D-H-A-R-M-A. Dharma is also a Buddhist term which refers to a very similar type of thing, but Dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A. Again, a set of teachings based on generosity, tolerance, and non-violence. Okay? Anyways, after Ashoka's death, you could say the Mauryan Dynasty begins to go downhill a little bit. It's like, this happens so often in world history. When you have a dominating leader who does a fabulous job, and then his heirs underneath him, they all, have their different ideas of what to do, and it leads to fractions and acrimony and fighting, and then things go downhill. Okay? So what we have here basically is that they go downhill, and from where you approximately, we're using years here in an approximate way, around 200 BCE up until about the turn of the millennium. A group of Greek-speaking Bactrians, again Bactria, B-A-C-T-R-I-A, that's the area in northwest India, but also really in modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan. They're now ruling over India for a couple of centuries, nothing of great note. And then from about the turn of the millennium, so about 1 CE till about 300 CE, a group of people called the Kushans, K-U-S-H-A-N-S, and these are nomads from Central Asia. They rule over South Asia for a while. Their high point is during a guy by the name of Kashika, K-A-S-H-I-K-A, who ruled from 78 to 103 of the Common Era. And basically, you don't have to know too much about these people. Just know that they play a key role in making sure that the Silk Road continues to grow and also go through India and pick up whatever goods India has to do. This is we'll get to this in a bit, you know, the idea of India being a crucial role in the Silk Road. Then after the Kushans, somewhere around you could say 375, maybe a little bit earlier, CE, the Gupta Dynasty is formed. The Gupta Dynasty is formed by Chandragupta. Chandragupta. Gupta. I got to make sure I enunciate my letters. Chandragupta. C-H-A-N-D-R-A, Gupta, G-U-P-T-A. Okay, Chandragupta. To compare the Gupta Dynasty with the Mauryan Dynasty, the Gupta Dynasty is smaller and it's much more decentralized than the Mauryan Dynasty. It's going to last a lot longer, but that's because of its decentralized nature, just like the Zhou Dynasty in China lasts for a very long time. But the the emperor of the Zhou Dynasty really didn't have the power and control. And it's going to be the same thing with the Gupta Dynasty. A group of white Huns, and we know the white Huns, we'll talk about them in chapter 11 with Rome, in chapter 12 with Rome. But the white Huns, which again are sort of these, you know, Central Asian, a little bit slightly Oriental individuals. I don't think their group was led by Attila, but they sort of caused chaos in and around South Asia, obviously lessening the power and the authority of the Gupta dynasty. And basically, you know, even after the 5th century of the Common Era, the Gupta is only, you know, you could say in charge by name only. They don't really have control and power. And for the few hundred years after this in South Asia, after this period of the 5th century and on, there will just be a group of regional kingdoms that will be ruling in South Asia, and then we'll get to where it is in the post-classical era, who steps in and fills that void. Okay? Let's now move on. In terms of economic development and social distinctions, one thing we need to know about India is India favors town life. Towns. Towns dot the Indian countryside, okay? Especially after 600 BCE, there's lots and lots of towns. So they're not known for their cities, they're known for their towns, okay? And these towns are all providing some type of manufactured and luxury goods. And India is fantastic at providing stuff like this, and they're trading with everybody. You can imagine, because India, the Indian Ocean, and just where it is in contrast between, you would say, the Far East and China, and then other parts of Central Asia and into Europe, they're trading with everybody, with Persia, with Indonesia, with Southeast Asia, etc., etc. Obviously, the caste system is still going strong, patriarchy still going strong, female subordination, child marriage. I don't mean to be like, you know, putting my hand into a fist as if I agree with this stuff, but understand that this is all part of South Asian Indian society, okay? Now, obviously, as more and more towns get erected and more people enter into South Asia, they need to be placed in the caste system. And as you can imagine, the amount of jati, remember we talked about jati in chapter 4, J-A-T-I, subdivisions also increases. And this is just a pattern which follows itself again and again and again. It's during this classical era that the Vaishyas and the Shudras, the two lower levels of the caste system, they're doing very well for themselves. And the Silk Road greatly improves their condition. All right, so this is sort of a heyday for the merchants and for peasants and for anyone who's providing any type of product, because India is sort of in the middle of this Silk Road trading network. Okay? And as time goes on, as you may imagine, the belief system of, you would say, the Aryans, Indra, Varuna, their ethical and their ideology becomes less important, as now this new blending, the Upanishads, the new blending of Dravidian and Aryan thought really dominates the Indian scene. But classical India is not just known for that in terms of what dominates the scene, what dominates people's hearts and minds and faith. okay? It's not just Hinduism, because there are other religions also coming from South Asia, India. And one of those major religions is Jainism. 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 Jainism was started by, you could just know Mahavira, Mahavira. He founded the Jain religion in the 5th century BCE. Some doctrine and some ethics concerning Jainism. First of all, it's very much inspired by the Upanishads, and it believes that everything in our universe has a soul. Okay? Very much they wanted to get rid of our selfish behavior in order to achieve some type of bliss. Okay? Jainists, the most famous term of Jainism, which is on your tests, is called Ahimsa. Ahimsa, A-H-I-M-S-A. Ahimsa is non-violence toward all living things. Again, Ahimsa, non-violence toward all living things. That means also the plants in the ground that provide you your carrots or whatever it is you eat from the plants in the ground. No, 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 don't be cutting them down. Don't do anything to them. All plants, anything which is alive, you should be non-violent towards them. Well, obviously, this is going to lead to a very demanding lifestyle because there isn't very much that you can eat as if you you may cause harm to something if you steal its flowers or whatever it is, its product from it. Okay, so Jainists are known for living a very, you could say, simple existence and an ascetic existence, A-S-C-E-T-I-C, very, very simple. Okay, thus it's very demanding. Okay, it's not one of the problems with Jainism. And one of the reasons why it never became an enormously huge world religion is because it's very, very demanding on its people, very demanding. It's all about simplicity, and it's just not very practical. It's not a practical alternative to the Brahman, the idea of the universal soul. However, there is a good deal of appeal of Jainism. What appeals to people about Jainism? First of all, it's the idea that individual souls equally participate in life. What does that mean? It means that they do not accept the caste system. They think the caste system is a load of hooey, H-O-O-E-Y, okay? They don't believe in it. So there's no caste system. So if you find yourself among, let's say, even the dasas, the untouchables, or the shudras, and you don't like where you are in terms of that, then obviously Jainism might provide a certain type of escape for you, okay? And that's its greatest appeal. That appeal is also found in the other major religion coming out of South Asia, and that's Buddhism. Buddhism. But as Buddhism is a very long topic, and it's going to take me about 10 minutes to describe everything that Buddhism represents, as well as popular Hinduism, I'm going to stop for this class today. And the way that I'm going to end class today is I'm going to give you a couple of questions for homework. All right, so here is your homework for this class, okay? Couple questions for you. Just think about them and I'll answer them at the beginning of next class. Number one, how does Taoism contrast with Confucianism? How does Taoism contrast with Confucianism? And number two, how did uneven distribution of wealth contribute to the collapse of the Han Dynasty? Again, how did the uneven distribution of wealth contribute to the collapse of the Han Dynasty? Again, my name is Jason. Thank you so much for listening. And we're now going to stroll on to the next class, number 8, in which we will finish this chapter on classical India, and we will head for Greece. If I knew how to pronounce some of the food there, I would try to make a joke, but I'm just not very good at pronunciation today. See you soon. Bye-bye.